This is the story of a man whose hubris and pride led him to build the biggest dome of his time and the largest brick dome to this day. This man was Filippo Brunelleschi. Filippo had a fairly good education. He was taught in literature and mathematics. These mathematics were essential to him becoming an architect later on in his life. When he turned 15, he was apprenticed to become a goldsmith. At 21, 6 years later, he was granted the rank of master goldsmith. A couple of years after this, a competition was held between 7 master goldsmiths, and they were tasked to depict the sacrifice of Isaac for a door panel on the baptistry of Florence. The judges of this competition were astounded with the work of another young goldsmith named Lorenzo Ghiberti. Before the judges even saw Brunelleschi's work, they had assumed that Lorenzo's work had won. But when the judges did see Brunelleschi's work, the judges decided that the two had tied. Brunelleschi did not like this, not one bit. He complained and said he'd rather have second place than tie with Lorenzo. The judges obliged, and he ended up winning silver. After this, Lorenzo left the goldsmith industry. This is the first instance we see of Filippo's pride and hubris. Think about it, alright? Filippo was so focused and believed that he was the best that he was not even willing to share first place. His pride was so hurt that he decided it was best not even to work in the same industry. So just like that, he left. He left what he'd been working on for the past almost decade and started the next chapter of his life: architecture. Brunelleschi visited Rome, and it is supposed here is where he began to develop his version of linear perspective. In his work, similarities can be seen in the classical Greek architecture. We see this in the lighting, the perspective. He does this all to manipulate the space he is working with so that he can mold the building into what he wants it to look like. 20 years into his architectural career, he was commissioned to build the first octagonal dome, which would be placed on top of the Florence Cathedral. This building is absolutely insane. It was 80 meters high by 42 meters wide and used nearly 4 million bricks. Brunelleschi started to work on this structure with his old friend Lorenzo Ghiberti from goldsmithing. Once he found out he was working with Lorenzo, he pretended to be sick. However, he was really working to get ahead of Lorenzo so that everyone would know he was the head architect and completely in control. Here we see his pride again because he was unwilling to share the fame. He had to be number one. Not to discredit his mathematical genius, however, because this man was crazy smart. Filippo built this structure with such intricacy that it is nearly impossible to imagine it. He laid each one of these bricks at a certain angle because it had nothing holding it up. No buttresses, no columns. It was based purely on these bricks. This is where we see the mathematics he was educated with come into play. The science and linear perspective that Brunelleschi used in architecture would be followed after him in many of the other Renaissance architects. Brunelleschi did not care about how people used the church to worship God, but instead only cared about his name being passed on through art history books to this day. Brunelleschi died roughly 10 years after his brainchild. The dome of the Florence Cathedral was finished. He left nothing behind. No evidence, no blueprints. This was all on purpose, though. He purposefully would mar and destroy his work so that he could not be copied in the future. We see this recurring theme with his pride and his arrogance. He wanted everything to be about himself. He did not care about others. He cared about was being the best. Here we see a shift happening from the early church age to the Renaissance age. People were no longer building things so that they could push people towards Christ, but they were building things all for selfish gain so that they would be remembered. Brunelleschi was one of the first people where we'd see this shift. However, he would be far from the last. My name is Hudson Scheffler. Thank you for watching.